There is, however, tremendous opportunity for reducing our oil use by simply shifting the cars we drive. Some of the most popular models out there, the Ford F-150 pickup, largest selling car for 9 of the last 10 years. Car, in quotation marks. The Chevy Silverado, the Toyota Camry, a little more of what we think of as a car. And they have, fuel economy measurements. If you just look at the city here, 14, 15, 21. But if you look at the most fuel-efficient cars that are mass-produced, that you can go and buy now, that don't require amazing new technology breakthroughs, you can easily double that. If we just change the cars we drive, we can double our fuel economy. Right now, our most popular models are pretty close to the very lowest fuel economy models that are out. If we shift them instead and make the most popular models the highest fuel economy models, there's an enormous change we can make here. However, cars stay on the road for more than a decade. So the cars we buy now are around and sucking gas for another decade, and we don't have another decade. Too bad we didn't make that shift, I don't know, starting after the 1970s. But we didn't. Cars are very inefficient. So of all of the energy that goes into that engine, the amount of gasoline that you're pumping in, only about 12.6% actually gets to the wheels. The rest is all lost. Internal combustion engines are much more efficient than they were 30 years ago, but they still have a long way to go. Part of that is the laws of physics. There's a Carnot efficiency here we can't exceed. Part of that is power to weight ratio. The car can't be like the size of a train, right? There are limits, but there's a lot of room for improvement. I'm occasionally accused of being some sort of left-wing nut, so I like to say, well, here was Business Week's plan. They're known for their radical environmentalism. Okay, that's where you're supposed to laugh. Checking to see if you're following here. So back in 2003, they said what we ought to do is take our fleet of vehicles that currently get 24 miles per gallon and shift to a fleet of vehicles that gets 40 miles per gallon. And that will cost us between $80 and $100 billion over 10 years. We're coming up on that 10-year mark if we'd actually done this, right? Car makers already have the technology, and in fact, will save more money than that in the fuel costs. That was based on the price of oil in 2003. So given that oil's 3 times as expensive, the savings would be enormous. They said what we need are policies that will give manufacturers and consumers the incentives to make and buy these vehicles. Well, 7 years have passed, we still don't have them. Obama did announce a new CAFE standard in May. It was modest, mild. The auto companies actually said it was fine. That compares with when CAFE was being debated in Congress in the 70s, and the CEO of Ford Motor Company said, if you pass this law, no one in America will be able to drive a car larger than a Vega. Remember the Vega? That was fairly small. I look around, doesn't seem like that actually happened. Anyway, Congress didn't pass it, so it's kind of a moot point. What we have seen is 3 different auto markets that have approached the problem of fuel efficiency 3 different ways. U.S. automakers were kind of late to the whole mileage race because we had cheap gas here. In Europe, gasoline's been taxed heavily for 30 years. Likewise in Japan. So Europe went for diesels. They said diesels have higher efficiency, they'll get more miles per gallon. As a policy matter, they really pushed diesels. Here in the U.S., we're pushing E85. Well, we are the breadbasket of the world. We have all this corn, right? In Japan, they started to trend toward gas-electric hybrids. The Insight, and then the Prius, and since then a whole host, and now everybody's kind of jumped on that bandwagon, but they were the first mover in that market. Looking at ethanol production, it's quite a growth industry. Over the last 10 years, ethanol production in the U.S. has grown 21% a year on average for a decade. There are very few industries that can say that, right? That's a serious growth industry. Yet after all that, we're only providing 7.7% of our gasoline fuel in the country, and that is consuming 30% of our entire corn crop. So if you do a little simple arithmetic here, we could provide 1/4 of our automobile fuel if we simply converted all of our corn into ethanol and left nothing to eat. Okay, interesting, but you know, this is not the silver bullet that allows us to live Plan B and go on living our lifestyle. It's just we're going to switch fuels and, you know, no big deal. No. Well, but there's cellulistic ethanol, technology. We're Americans. We know technology will work us out of any problem. And what we'll do is we'll break down the complex carbohydrates in the non-edible portions of plant matter, right? The corn stalks, the straw from the wheat fields, the stuff they cut out of forests that isn't suitable for lumber or even oriented strand board, but you know, the bark and stuff like that. And we'll break that all down into ethanol using amazing new technologies. And there are 28 companies out there developing it. There are pilot plants going up. But if we convert every bit of that biomass that the USDA could find anywhere in a fantasy paper, we could supply 30% of our fuel needs. Well, maybe that's a good idea, and we should work on that. But it's not the saving grace that's going to take care of all this problem for us. Europe, as I said, has been pushing diesels. Gasoline there was $4 to $6 a gallon for decades. It's higher than that now. And diesels have higher compression ratios. They're more efficient at converting fuel into motion. The diesel fuel also has more energy per gallon, which kind of makes that look like a bigger advantage than it really is. But bottom line, they get 30 to 60% more miles per gallon. For example, the VW Lupo gets 66 in the city and 87 on the highway. Ordinary car, right? This isn't a hybrid, this isn't fuel cells, this isn't anything amazing, it's just a car with a diesel engine. And this is how, if you remember the charts from Pat there, you know, the consumption of oil or consumption of energy per capita in Europe is just a little more than half of that in the US. How do they do that? Well, that's one of the ways. They have a much more efficient fleet of vehicles. They did that transition across the last 30 years while we did not. So the US has kind of jumped on this. The EPA passed the Clean Diesel Program to limit the pollution from diesels. So for those of us old enough to remember, we used to have lead in gasoline. We had to take the lead out so that we could use catalytic converters to reduce the emissions. Similar situation here. Our diesel fuel has a lot of sulfur in it, and there's some great particulate traps that can take the black soot out of diesel exhaust, but the sulfur clogs them. So they had to remove the sulfur from the diesel fuel so that they could put on the particulate traps so that we could have cleaner diesels. And those rules have kicked in now, so the diesel being sold in the US is clean enough now to use these traps. I was expecting, as I've been talking about this over years, that we'd have this flood of new diesel models hitting the US market, and I just haven't seen it. So this has been kind of one more missed opportunity and kind of a surprise to me. I thought this one would happen, especially with fuel prices high, right, that the auto companies would jump on that. I just haven't seen it. I'm not sure why.
They got burned.
Yeah, they got burned in the 70s. Don't want to go back there. Or they're all bankrupt, so they have no R&D company anymore. I don't know. Hybrid drives. So for folks who aren't familiar, this is kind of a hybrid electric car. You've got your standard internal combustion engine, but in addition, you have a generator, you have an electric motor, and you have batteries. So you can run the car perhaps on electric-only mode up to a certain speed as long as you have battery power. If you want to go faster, need more power, or if the battery is running down, the engine kicks on and runs the generator and runs the battery as well as driving the wheels. In some hybrid electrics, like the Prius, these can run independently, so the motor may be running and the engine, or just the motor, or just the engine, and the computer, you know, makes all that happen, right? Very high-tech solution with some, you know, dramatic results. The other thing you get with a hybrid is you can recover energy from braking. So right now when you hit most cars, when you hit your brakes, you're converting all the energy of motion in your car into heat on your brake pads and your discs, right? In a hybrid, they can take some of that and recover it by engaging the generator, having the generator slow your car down, putting some of that power back in your battery, So that then when you take off from that stoplight, you pull the power back out of the battery, run it through the electric motor, convert it back to motion.